welcome to the Kingdom Network Leadership Podcast with Matthew Watley. I'm your host, Dr. Daryl Williams. You know, they always say never meet your heroes because they'll disappoint. That is not true. If you have the right heroes, when you meet them, they don't just meet your expectations, they exceed your expectations. And when you're really lucky, they go from mentor to friend to family. And that's why it is my honor today to really have the chance to sit down and interview one of my mentors, one of my heroes, the Reverend Dr. William D. Watley. Help me welcome Dr. Watley to the podcast, everyone. Dr. Watley, so good to have you with us today.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Daryl.
We are excited to have you with us. You are literally a living legend. And I thought it would be nice to be able to get you on the TKN podcast to really talk about a legacy of leadership. A lot of times we are talking to leaders in the midst of it, but the chance to talk to somebody and reflect on what they've done is amazing for us. You have been a college president. You've led mega churches. You were the Secretary of State and Commerce for the state of New Jersey. Is there anything you haven't done?
Oh, yes, there are plenty I haven't done, and I'm learning in this new season of my life. I've always hoped to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
To escape the penalty of irrelevance. Mm-hmm. And because I think that life always has something to teach us no matter where we are. And as times change, the learning experience, if we don't become trapped in nostalgia, becomes even more exciting.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning. When you started your leadership journey, looking back, what was the thing that you wish you knew then that you know now?
As I look back, I wish I had known the importance of financial preparation for the future.
Okay.
God has blessed us. But I was under the naive assumption that if you did right and loved the Lord, then the church and the Lord would just take care of you, without understanding that there has to be a process and a plan for financial well-being. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I wish I had known in the beginning was the interpersonal connections and experiences mm-hmm. that people have towards each other that can either challenge or undermine or even enhance your leadership.
Okay.
So that you tend to look at a person as a steward, a trustee, a good member, not recognizing that's somebody's cousin, that's somebody's friend,
sure,
that's somebody's schoolmate or fraternity brother, sorority sisters, and they share an experience. So that leadership, one of the first lessons I had to learn was that it could be very lonely. The other thing that I think that, and I'm grateful that I came from a loving family, mm-hmm. was the importance of family.
Sure.
That my whole approach now to leadership, this is perhaps more than you're asking for,
No.
is that I used to believe that the church should be your first priority, mm-hmm. or whatever, the school or whatever it was. I've come to now understand that it ought to be your fourth priority.
Fourth priority.
Fourth priority. Your first priority always needs to be ministry and time with God.
Okay.
I mean, that's not a cliche, that's just a reality. We can wake up with our minds clouded mm-hmm. with all that we have to do, and not spend quality time with the Lord, and only spend time with the Lord when it comes a special assignment like writing a sermon.
Sure.
But your first, God calls your discernment, your vision, wisdom comes from spending time with God. And that's not always easy, considering the things that press. So your first commitment ought to be God.
Gotcha.
Your second commitment ought to be yourself.
Yourself.
That we have to be good stewards of our own health, our own finances, and our own mental capacity. Because we sometimes think that we are called to a life of martyrdom or messiahship, but we must first take care of ourselves, because if we don't take care of ourselves, we do not then have anything to give to others. So your take days off, vacations, and do things, develop friendships apart from the transactional relationships in your profession, and enjoy life in terms of who you are apart from your responsibilities.
Okay.
So your second commitment ought to be to yourself. Your third commitment ought to be to your family.
Okay.
That our families ought to not be punished or put in a second place because of our calling or because of our responsibility. And we need to understand, and that can be difficult.
Sure.
What do you do if there's a major community event and your child is in a concert? I mean, how or people are needing you, and your child wants you to attend a basketball game or a football game.
Yeah.
So understanding family and understand they are a gift from God too is your third commitment. And then comes your ministry and your responsibility. Because if either of those three aspects are out of sync or not fully developed, then your responsibility will not be enhanced, or it will not grow as it should because of those other conflicts in a very personal way that prevent you from giving them the time that they deserve. And the time that they deserve, the time that your ministry, your responsibility, your job deserves, is time after God, after yourself, after family.
Now, I hope you were all listening to that, because that is a mouthful. Your 4 priorities: start with God, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and then you can deal with what you're leading. Many times we will put what we're leading before everything else, and then everything else falls out of whack. Now, Dr. Watley, you have written, how many books is it now?
I think it's 27 books and booklets.
27 books and booklets. So here's my question for you. You didn't write those in a vacuum. You were working the entire time at your primary leadership posting. How did you discipline yourself to create the level of creativity and time? Because we only get 24 hours in a day. To put God first, take care of yourself, take care of your family, lead what you were leading, and write 20 plus books.
Well, I think you schedule that time.
Okay.
Like you schedule any other time.
Okay.
So I'm an early riser. And so I have my time with God, and then I write for an hour or so once I get a vision about what it is that I should be writing.
Sure.
There are several books in me now that are waiting to be put in. There is one at the publisher now
Okay.
that will be released in the next month or so.
Wonderful.
And some of my books come out of my sermon preparation.
Okay.
After 60 years, I still write my sermons out, word for word.
Word for word, full manuscript.
Word for word. And so that discipline helps you then in terms of writing other things that are weighing on your spirit.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. You have served in different spheres. You've served in higher education, you've served in government, and you've served local churches. What is what's the constant of leadership in those different realms, and what are the differences in leadership in those different realms?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that none of those job descriptions are what you think.
Okay.
So that I used to think that being a president of a college was an academic position. It is not.
Okay.
It is an administrative position. And so your responsibilities are fundraising, recruitment, satisfying the alumni, and pleasing your board.
Mm-hmm.
The academic part has nothing to do with in ecumenism. One learns the importance of Reinhold Niebuhr's arguments regarding moral man and immoral society, which I think is my favorite classics.
Okay.
So because Niebuhr asserts that institutions start off with a mission, but at a certain point they become self-serving and they move from movements to institutionalization, and so their own survival becomes what is key.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I worked in the ecumenical world, I saw how institutionalism defined many of the denominational challenges
Okay.
that brought us together in dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of pastoring, I had to recognize that I had to make time for what I really loved.
Okay.
I love to preach and I love to pastor people.
Yeah.
The reality is that if you allow it, 70 to 80% of your time will be involved in administration,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all like being a college president. The 800-pound elephant in the pastorate is raising money
Mm-hmm.
to meet your obligations.
Sure.
No matter how well you preach, no matter how many people you see, if there is not money there to pay the light bill, mortgage, or whatever, then you have failed as a pastor.
Yeah.
And so one then has to recognize that institutionalism is a kind of common thread.
Yeah.
Along with the whole dynamics of personal and political power.
Yeah.
Of people with whom you must work with, either as a contemporary or either as a person who is under their supervision.
Gotcha.
So, a long way to answer. I write because I make the time to write and because it's important. And for me, it is a good escape and release from what can be very inane and taxing and depressing.
Yeah.
And confession is good for the soul but bad for the reputation. That writing for me is a way of also creating legacy.
Okay.
That I grew up under some powerful preachers whose ministry and whose sermons and whose life the world has forgotten about because they are not written down. And so I wanted to leave something that would be instructive and helpful. And then I was urged to do it by my father. My father was not formally educated. And so he would listen to me and said, William, you ought to write these sermons down. I said, sir, he said, because, a person like me, I could take one of your sermons and get 2 or 3 out of it. And so he pressed upon me. And then back in the 60s, or was it the 70s, these books came out about outstanding black sermons and great black. And I read them, and I said, I know I'm not sharpest knife in the drawer, but I know I can do better than that. So Judson Press at the time was publishing one of these books. So I wrote, since I was writing sermons, it was a matter of getting somebody to edit them.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a proposal, including some of my sermons. And then at the same time, the distinguished icon, Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor, wrote a proposal for a book of his messages.
Oh, wow.
And Judson Press made not an ecumenical decision, but a marketing decision. They said Watley is Methodist, Proctor is Baptist. We put them together.
Do one book, we'll get both markets.
The market. And they called me and said, would you write a book with Dr. Proctor? I said, you're asking the wrong person the wrong question. It is, would Dr. Proctor write a book with me? And Dr. Proctor was very kind and gracious, and so Sermons from the Black Pulpit came out, and that was the beginning. The second one was my thesis on Martin Luther King dissertation. I updated it because people felt that King was a great preacher, but they were not prepared to give the black church credit for his intellectual foundation.
Right.
And so the reason that he became involved with the school of thought that he did in school was because there were themes lifted from the black church he had heard all of his life. And so that became my second book, Roots of Resistance, the Nonviolent Ethic of Martin Luther King. And from then on, I just began to write as a matter of my own personal discipline and a desire.
Gotcha. Now, you're a prolific writer, you're a prolific reader, you're a prolific leader, but we all know you can preach. Will you be kind enough to share your process for coming to a sermon? One of the things that we know is that sermon writing, sermon delivery, and sermons in general have changed in this new world. People preach for short bursts on Instagram, but that's never been you. You preach thick, meaty, dense sermons. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you approach creating sermons?
I have ADD.
Okay.
So that I don't want anybody wasting my time. I get bored very quickly. And so I try not to waste anybody else's time. I think that preaching ought to be about content.
Yeah.
And when you write, it sort of forces you to not put fluff in, but to write real content. Sermons, as you know, are either scripture-led, life-led, or subject-led. I preach across the years a number of series because I think that as you preach a series, it helps a congregation to have some kind of focus.
Yeah.
And even though sermon writing has changed, I understand now that your audience, whether it's my age or the next generation's age or the next generation, you have about 2 or 3 minutes to really capture them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I once a text and begins to evolve, I try to find a real dynamic, without being sensational for the sake of being sensational, introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to give the text justice. I'll never forget once, one of my favorite verses is 1 John 3:2. Now we the sons of God does see what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called children of God. Now we the sons and daughters of God does not yet appear what we shall be, but we know when he shall appear we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And I preached that sermon, I think I was around 16 or 17, 18, and I really didn't do it justice, and I promised I would never preach another sermon that I really couldn't do justice to in terms of text. So I believe that content matters.
Yes.
Not just one-liners, but content matters. And if the same generation can watch a 2 and 3 hour movie, they can hear a sermon if there is something of substance. So I really struggle to have substance, to really see as you write, you get new insights into the text. And I believe that sermon ought to be about the Word of God.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I struggle to make sure that there is content and that there is a degree of time. I know I'm aware. I'm not trying to hear anybody stay up there all day. I'm not trying to stay up there at all. So I think a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes if it's really flowing. And so that's how I approach it. And it takes time to do that.
Yeah.
And it takes, as a number of persons have already pointed out, prayer to do that. And so we need to make the time. You can't do this on a Saturday night. And so through the years when I pastored, I've said to people, do not disturb me on Thursday. And now as I've gotten older, it's Wednesday and Thursday.
Gotcha.
That I take the time to write in depth the sermon and have it completed, same amount. And because I've learned to type, for me the sermon should not be longer than 8 or 9 pages.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. How have you used sermons as a leadership tool in congregations?
People, if you feed people the word, it is a means of gaining their trust.
Okay.
Becoming a pastor involves 2 things. It involves the assignment or the call that gives you the title.
Yep.
But it means that people have to accept you in their heart or have a trust factor.
Gotcha.
And as you feed people substantively, then it becomes a matter that, okay, I think I can trust him
Gotcha.
or her. And then that becomes, I once had an issue in which the church had a raggedy parsonage.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to live in it. It was a neighborhood. I wasn't going to bring my family there.
Sure.
And I wanted to buy another place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And a group of old, set in their ways trustees was determined that I was going to live in that parsonage.
Mm-hmm.
They had already, and I just simply said, you can vote to keep me there, but if you do, I'm going to take it to a church conference. Because I knew, and they knew, they could not outvote me with a church conference.
Sure.
Because the congregation had been responsive to the preaching and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So that your sermon then becomes a tool for feeding and growing people, but it also becomes a means, because no one else in the church has access to the congregation.
In the same way the preacher does. Yeah. What do you see as next for the church? What do you think the challenges are and the opportunities for the church? We're post-Christendom. We're in a divided country. The real rise in Christianity is the global South. What do you see as the next set of challenges and opportunities are for the church?
Welcome to the first century AD. I take the position that Christianity should never have lived based on the fact that they told the world that a condemned criminal was the Son of God. And it offered a lifestyle that was different
Mm-hmm.
than prostitution and sexual immorality was to Corinth what politics is to D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
what gambling is to Vegas.
Stock and trade.
Yeah, how do you go to Vegas and say gambling is wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you say to D.C., Washington, that we're too political? But the church, they believed so much that they were willing to be anti-cultural. Number one, it will take people who are anchored in the Word and in prayer.
Yeah.
It will take efforts to be countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
We seem to think that if we can follow the world and do what the world does, then no. We grew by being countercultural. And it will take flexibility and openness in terms of methodology. I think that there are certain aspects of the faith that will reap the wrath and the anger of God for bowing to culture.
Wow.
Based on their narrow issue for the pro-life. I am pro-life. I believe life. I'm pro-life in the womb and pro-life outside.
Yeah.
I don't understand people who can be pro-life, people in the womb, and then vote against. So, yeah, I'm pro-life.
You're pro-life from conception to burial.
That's right. Until the resurrection.
Until the resurrection.
And so I think that the evangelical far right was so adamant about an issue that they sold their soul to support a candidate who represented everything that they claimed that they stood against. Mm-hmm. You don't have to sell your soul to stand for right. And if you find yourself compromising, then evidently you are not preaching Christ and Him crucified. Remember, Christ was not crucified for His works, but for His words.
Yeah.
And so if you're not willing to be prophetic and loving and pastoral, then you do not represent their essence. So I think it will take people really believing the faith in terms of its fundamentals. I think it will take a willingness to be countercultural. And I think it will take flexibility. Ephesus was not Philippi. Rome was not Thessalonica. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The region of Galatia was certainly different than Ephesus. I mean, you know what I mean?
I understand. Yeah.
So that if I can use a term,
please do,
that I think people will have to use. It's the term of Max Weber,
okay,
who talks about the bureaucratization of charisma.
Yeah.
So that we start using our charismatic gifts to fit into a certain pattern, mm-hmm. so that becomes, which is an outgrowth of Niebuhr's thesis, but in terms of our own gifts, mm-hmm. I'm trying to be, in my understanding, what it means to be a black preacher. Yeah. My understanding what it means to be a woman preacher, or a mainline preacher, or a preacher of a big church, or mm-hmm. And so I'm willing to take the charismatic gifts I have and mold them to fit a certain image, rather than allowing God to use them. And I think also we must become learners and listen to what the questions somebody mentioned that people are really asking.
Yeah.
And try to address those questions with integrity based on the Word of God.
Faith, fundamentals, flexibility, and listen to find out what the real problems are and address them with the Word.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, that has been Dr. William Donnell Watley. He's my mentor. He is one of my favorite people on the planet. It's been awesome to have him on the TKN Leadership Podcast. Before you go, I always do 3 questions just to let people know, get to know you a little bit better. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Chocolate.
Chocolate.
I need to be prayed for. I'm in bondage to dark chocolate, uh-huh. whether it's ice cream or candy. But if it's ice cream, it's going to be chocolate or chocolate chip.
There you have it. What's your favorite place to go on vacation?
South Africa.
South Africa?
Cape Town, South Africa. I've been to South Africa 10 times. Cape Town, and then Dubai.
We could do a whole podcast on your travels. You are one of the most traveling folk that I know. Last but not least, one thing that you want our podcast audience to know about leadership, if they didn't get anything else, what do you want them to get before we go?
Be who you are.
Be who you are.
Because people can discern when you are a phony, and in time, your real self will come out. So just be who you are and have confidence in who God has made you to be.
Thank you. Folks, that's podcast gold. I told you, when you get the chance to have mentors that exceed your expectations, it will blow your mind. Thank you for joining us. You know the TKN Leadership Podcast with Matthew Watley. We exist to help get leaders to their next level, and I know today helped you get to another level. God bless you. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.